Hi class, and welcome to lecture 6, Fluids and Electrolytes. So what we're going to do today is go over the case study, the role of water, fluid basics, that includes fluid balance, total body water, shifts in water, electrolytes, sweat rate, hydration and performance, fluid recommendations, case study application, and then summary. So remember, sports nutrition is not a game of who can eat and drink the most, unless you're doing a eating tournament contest, but that's not who we work with in general. So you do not need to replace 100% of what you lose during an event. Water, central for life. So it's the most biological active molecule in the body. Without it, you can only live for a few days. I think about 3 days, 2 to 3 days, depending on temperature and environment. But with food, without food, you can live up to like a week or more. It's the most abundant substance in the body, makes up at least on average 60%, and it has many different roles. It can be an aqueous medium to allow for chemical reactions and processes to proceed, such as ATP production. It can act as a role for transportation, so it can help transport red blood cell, gases, nutrients, hormones throughout the body, and it can act as thermoregulation to help maintain proper body temperature. Water and exercise. So the goal for fluids, water, and exercise is for the person, the athlete, to stay well hydrated. It helps to delay the onset of fatigue, prevent dehydration, and any possible negative health effects associated with dehydration. So making certain critical plays and things of that nature. It helps to sustain critical cardiovascular and thermoregulatory functions. So it helps to keep the heart working optimally and for the body not to overheat or last as long as it can before it does. And it's been shown in certain studies that even 1% loss of body weight can decrease sports performance, especially in really hot and humid environments. So who are the athletes that must be most concerned regarding their fluid replacement? So those that are in moderate to vigorous intensity of prolonged duration exercise. Those include athletes in endurance sports and team sports such as soccer, basketball, and football. Fluid concerns. So it's like the Goldilocks theory, like not too much, not too little, but just right. So having too much or excessive amounts of consumption of fluids can cause hyperhydration, which can lead to GI distress, low plasma osmolarity, um, and may incorrectly address. The athlete may try to fix it by drinking more water, thinking that that might be the issue, but actually can worsen the issue and can possibly lead to hyponatremia, which can possibly be fatal, right? Especially if they keep drinking plain water. On the other hand, inadequate consumption can cause dehydration, hypohydration, decreased performance. It's also possible to be fatal, but in general, it's almost impossible. Like the body is going to just give out before it gets to that point, versus if it's excessive, it's more likely. However, there's certain sports or environments where inadequate consumption can be deadly, such as the Marathon des Sables. So if you guys look it up, it's a really cool race. I wanted to do it, but it's quite hard. What are basics? Fluid balance. So we can see from this image that euhydration is when you have adequate volume of water to meet physical demands. Hyperhydration means that there is an excess amount of water in the body. Hypohydration means there is insufficient amount of water in the body. And it kind of shows you what the body's current state of hydration is. While dehydration and rehydration describes the process of either losing or gaining weight. So in dehydration, the body's in the process of losing body water. So it's moving from euhydration to hypohydration, while rehydration is the process of the body gaining body water. So total body water depends primarily on body composition, specifically muscle mass. So the more muscle mass one has, the more water weight will be associated with it. Um, and that's why when you see somebody with a larger body size, they most likely have more total body water. Males greater than female, and younger usually greater than older population for total body water. And again, it's mostly due to muscle mass. In the average person, there is about 60% of the body is made up of water, and it can be up or down 10 to 20% depending on the amount of lean body mass that one has, or body fat. Total body water distribution. So how is water distributed in the body? So there's two main components of total body water: extracellular fluid, which includes fluids that's found in the plasma, such as in the blood, and in the interstitial area, so in between the cells of the body. So inside the cells of the body is considered the intracellular fluids. So those are the two major components. So in the intracellular fluids, which is all water contained within the body's cell, it accounts for 2/3 of total body water. And there's over 1 trillion cells inside the body, and each cell contains varying amounts of fluids, which are separated by the cell membrane. So there's a lot of cells, and each of them contain water, and it accounts for most of the total body water in a person. In the extracellular fluids, it's all the water contained outside of the body's cells, and that accounts for about 1/3 of total body water. So plasma, or the water portion of blood, is about 20% of extracellular fluid. It is the transport medium for red blood cells, nutrients, gases, hormones, and so on and so forth. Critical for thermoregulation, and is contained within the vascular system. So it's separated by the blood vessel walls and capillaries. However, it can be permeable, so allows movement between the interstitial fluid and plasma. The interstitial fluid, which makes up 80% of the extracellular fluids, surrounds and protects the cells, and it provides an avenue for exchange between the two components. So as shown by this diagram, you can see where the interstitial fluid is located, and where the extracellular fluids are located, so both in the plasma and in the interstitial area. Water distribution. This example is the water distribution in a 70 kilogram person with 45 liters of total body water. So it just shows you how fluid intake can affect the plasma or intravascular space, which can cause exchange between the interstitial fluid, which can cause changes osmotically with the intracellular fluid. And then fluid output can happen with the lungs giving out vapor, skin with sweat, kidneys producing urine, and the GI tract with feces. So the body also has different electrolyte distribution in the different compartments. So in extracellular fluid, plasma, and interstitial fluid have very similar composition and distribution of electrolytes. So their major cation is sodium, and their major anion is chloride and bicarbonate. This differs from the intracellular fluid, where the major cation is potassium, and the major anion is phosphate. And the concentration differences causes constant pressure. And this is just like usually sodium trying to enter the intracellular fluid and potassium trying to leave the intracellular fluid. But this is balanced by fluid movement. So water balance losses. So the body loses about 2,500 milliliters a day. This is average 70 kilogram person. There's sensible losses. Sensible means that a person can notice these losses. This can be like sweat, urine, and feces. You know it. You know that you're losing liquid. And the amount depends on the person, the athlete, their exercise, their intensity, duration, and the environment. On average, for a normal day, it's about 6 to 8 cups, and that's not active. Insensible losses are losses that you cannot really tell. So that's like ventilation when you're breathing in and out. And you can tell when it's like really foggy in your car and you breathe onto the window and you can make a smiley face. So that's like the ventilation, or humidity inside the body. That's keeping the skin moist, that's keeping the air humid. And this varies between athlete and environment. So this image over here tells you the averages of the loss in normal weather. And as you can see, as the weather gets warmer, um, you can see that the losses increase, and it can increase quite substantially. All right, that's over what, almost 3 times more. All right, from moving from 68 to 85 degrees. And what's the largest component? All right, sweat. Anything else interesting? So respiratory tract goes up, right? Because you're breathing more when you're exercising. There's more oxygen intake, carbon dioxide output. But look at this. This goes down actually, right? Urine production goes down. Why does urine production go down during warmer weather for an athlete? Think about that. So how do you counteract that loss? So to balance it out, there's gains, right? And we can get that from food and beverages, and that amounts to about 10 cups a day. And also your metabolism. Remember what we talked about? Oxidative phosphorylation also releases carbon dioxide and H2O. So fluid balance, a person normally consumes excessive amounts of fluids to meet the body's needs, and any excess is excreted. So it's kind of hard to overhydrate, but you can. But in general, any excess is just excreted, and that's what happens. Sodium needs. So, we all learned in nutrition class, and we read any health article. Um, they're trying to say 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day, um, or even less than that, right? Like 1,500 grams, 1,500 milligrams. And that's for the adequate intake for less than 50-year-old people. Also for other populations too, right? So those with hypertension, African Americans, those with certain disease states, right? They want to keep it low because they're trying to reduce the risk for hypertension and cardiovascular disease. However, if you look at the IOM recommendation, they're saying that these don't actually really apply to highly active individuals who may lose large amounts of sweat daily. Also, sodium is regulated by the kidneys, is reabsorbed or excreted in the urine to maintain sodium balance. And average urinary sodium excretion can be ranging from 1 to 5 grams per day, depending on how much sodium you're taking in. So, is your athlete general population, or are they a more highly active individual who lose large amounts of sweat daily? So, if you're a professional video game player, where would you be? Okay, sodium intake and excretion. So again, you can take sodium food, fluids, supplements, tablets, and you excrete it through sweat, urine, and feces. In general, any excess that you consumed and is not used is excreted. In industrialized countries, males consume about 4.2 grams per day, females 3.3 grams per day. So that's a lot more than the regular recommendations. And this is usually due from really processed foods. So about 77% of the sodium we consume in foods is from processed foods, 11% from table salt. And remember, table salt is not sodium. It's a mixture of sodium and chloride, 40% sodium, 60% chloride in 1 gram of salt. And about 12% from which is naturally found in food. So even natural foods, whole foods, there's a little bit of sodium in there, but very small. So if we look at the foods that are usually high in salt, like pretzels, chips, popcorn, oodles of noodles, haven't had that since like college, but would this fit in an athlete's diet? Could this be recommended, or would this be recommended? What do you guys think? And I'll ask you in class. So electrolyte loss in sweat. Sweat contains electrolytes, sodium, potassium, chloride, and minerals such as iron, calcium, and magnesium. Sodium is the largest electrolyte that is lost. It varies between individuals from 400 to 2,000 milligrams of sodium per liter of sweat. In general, this is the only critical element that needs to be replaced um, in sweat or in fluids. Um, Hypotonic to blood at 3,500 milligrams per liter. It's affected by sweat rate, dietary sodium, heat, acclimation, and gender. What that means is that the more you sweat, the more sodium is usually excreted. The more sodium you intake, the more sodium is excreted. Heat acclimation. So if you're more heat acclimated, you kind of hold on to sodium a little better. Gender, I believe males excrete more sodium than females. Exercise duration. So if exercise is less than 2 hours, sodium is most likely not a limiter. It's not going to be a problem for those in general. And those that exercise over 2 hours, it can possibly be a limiter. Of course, it depends on the person, the event, the intensity, right? Because you could do a 2-hour walk, that's really not going to do anything. It's not going to really test your electrolyte limits. So you must experiment during training, try and error, see what works. And of course, use fluids, sodium, and carbohydrates in combination. Potassium is the primary intracellular cation. You can get it from foods such as fruits, vegetables, or supplements. Less than 3% of the US adults actually meet the adequate amounts of potassium from the diet. However, potassium is not a cause for cramping. A lot of people think like, oh, you gotta eat a banana and you won't get cramps. It's a very small amount or percentage that's lost in sweat versus the whole body. So why do like races and stuff like that give bananas out? When do they give it out usually? So what are the causes for cramping? So exercise associated muscle cramping. There is no strong evidence. Athletes with exercise associated muscle cramping were no significant differences on levels of dehydration or electrolytes versus athletes without exercise associated muscle cramping. So they didn't see any differences between the levels of hydration or electrolyte status between those that had cramping and those that did not have cramping. Also, the textbook says that it's most likely due to altered neuromuscular control. And this is because of muscle fatigue or repetitive contractions over a long period of time. So what happens is that the muscle reaches a certain threshold of fatigue and a sensory feedback to the muscle, nervous system malfunctions, and the failure to send the relaxation signal causes excess contraction signals, which leads to cramping. So it's associated with level of conditioning, environmental conditions, and intensity of exercise. However, I would say yes, but also in real life, there is a possibility it can be due to dehydration and electrolytes. So you want to make sure you dot all your I's and cross all your T's. Um, so trial and error. So you got to make sure there's adequate amounts of fluids, sodium, you can cool the temperature, what may it be. But I would just say make sure you're using the right tool for the right job. So, you know, if it's happening, um, like you're not going to do massage or strength training or program changing to fix dehydration and the electrolytes. That's more for muscle fatigue. And if it's a muscle fatigue thing, you're not gonna. I mean, if it's gonna be a nutritional thing, you're not gonna use relaxation, right? You're gonna use nutritional therapy. So you must know which tool to use for which job. Factors affecting sweat rate. So sweat rate is the rate at which the body loses water through sweating, and this is usually up to 2.5 liters per hour. So the factors that affect sweat rate include exercise intensity. So the higher the intensity, the higher the energy expenditure, which increases the metabolic heat production, which increases core temperature, which will eventually cause increase in sweat rate. Another factor is environmental conditions. So if temperature is warmer, so the hotter it gets, the hotter your core temperature gets, the more you're going to sweat, right? Because it's trying to cool you down. Humidity, so the higher the water vapor in the air, the lower the ability for sweat to cause evaporation, which causes your body to cool down. So if the sweat doesn't evaporate, you're not going to cool down, and that's just going to lead to further sweating. Sunlight, right? So you know that if you're in the sunlight, it's a lot hotter than if you're in the shade, and so this can increase core temperature, and then of course increase sweat rate. Wind can help with increasing evaporation of sweat and can help with decreasing body temperature. Clothing, uniform, gear. These are barriers or possible barriers to heat loss. However, there are some clothing that can help with improving heat loss, right? That can help with evaporation and decreasing total temperature. But let's say like a football player, right? Hockey players, that clothes can actually cause them to sweat more, increase core temperature, which increases the sweat rate. So I saw this article recently. Um, so it's about a German beach volleyball duo. They are the world championship silver medalists, Borger and Swed, and they're boycotting a volleyball tournament. And this is because the athletes were asked to wear shirts and long trousers rather than your usual attire, which is a bikini. And the athletes stated they would normally be happy to adapt to any country, but that the extreme heat in Doha meant that bikinis were necessary. So they didn't think that they could play at their best, it would hinder their performance, and so they decided to not play. So, where is Doha? Does anybody know? And what's the temperature there? What's the humidity? So do you think that they would be or could be inhibited their performance by wearing shirts and long trousers? What do you think? So other factors affecting sweat rate includes training status. So again, the more trained you are, the more trained an athlete, actually you're going to sweat more and you're going to sweat sooner at a higher rate versus those untrained. And you would think that's a bad thing. However, this can be a good thing. What do you guys think? Why would that be? The degree of acclimation. So exposure to high temperatures during training results in certain adaptations. So it increases sweat rate, but also increases plasma volume, total body water, red blood cell mass. It also increases anti-diuretic hormone, so it makes your body not want to pee. Try to hold on to as much fluid as possible. and also decreases sodium loss in sweat. So when you do sweat, it's going to be more water um, and less sodium. Hydration and sports performance. So what's the problem? So have you ever ran or exercised or did any kind of physical activity in cold weather or cool weather? How did you feel? When you started versus when you ended? Were you still the same feeling? It was always cool and cold, or did you get warmer as you exercised? And then compare your how you felt when you were exercising in really hot weather, really warm weather, like in the summer. So, do you like or perform better in the cooler temperature or the very warm or hot temperature? So, also know that when you do exercise, you actually create tremendous amounts of heat. Um, Even on the bicycle, which is pretty efficient, it's still only 25%. So, the body needs to produce and oxidize uh, a lot of energy, a lot of watts. So, even for like 400 watts for 1 hour, in order to produce that kind of output, you know, you need to produce 1600 watts. So where does the other 1200 watts go? It's distributed as heat. That's a lot of heat. Hydration status and sports performance. So how does your body respond to heat? So what it does is try to cool yourself down, right? Because when you overheat, you sweat a lot, and it can cause poor performance, can cause cardiovascular disease. Cardiovascular complications. So it's trying to cool yourself down by one, redistribution of blood flow. So the blood vessels to the skin dilate, so they open up, and this helps to try to cool down or remove the heat from the central part of the body. It causes relative hypovolemia. So there's no fluid loss, but the vascular space expands due to the peripheral vasodilation, while the relative volume of blood in the vascular system goes down. There's increased heart rate, so the heart is trying to work a little bit harder, and the RPE goes up. Sweat, so you lose water and some electrolytes in an attempt to cool the skin or the body down through evaporation. So most of the water is coming from the plasma. It's hypotonic, meaning that it's mostly fluid, less solute compared to the plasma. And in elite endurance athletes, their sweat rates can be, even up to like 4 liters an hour. So that's a lot. And this can cause further hypovolemia, which can further cause increase in heart rate and can cause further increases in rate of perceived exertion, which means you're going to stop a lot earlier than you're maybe used to. There's a limited amount of plasma, and as the duration extends, dehydration continues, which makes the heat worse. The body must choose to deliver oxygen and nutrients, such as carbohydrates, to the exercising muscle or dermal regulation. All right. So where would you want the blood to go? So excessive dehydration impairs sports performance. So a 2 to 7% body weight loss causes a decrease in endurance performance, and this is especially so in hot and humid conditions. It can decrease physical and mental ability, so you decrease the cognitive function. Um, that's possible. The brain actually shrinks, right, because of the intracellular water moving out to try to keep equilibrium with the extracellular fluids. However, there's a lot of individual variation. Some athletes can tolerate hydration a little bit more versus other a little less. VO2 max also decreases. So with more than 3% body weight loss, um, normal or ambient temperature, VO2 max starts decreasing. Um, in high temperature or really warm, hot weather, a 2% body weight loss can start showing decreases in VO2 max. Endurance exercise is also impaired, and there's a greater impairment as the distance and duration of the event increases. So, like a marathon versus a 5K. It also affects low intensity exercise as well. And this table shows the effects of dehydration on aerobic performance in different sports. So, like basketball, distance cycling, soccer, um, wrestling, and it shows the degree of hydration and how it can affect one's performance. So in the real world, there's certain athletes or people that believe that having a low body weight is or the lowest body weight that they can obtain is good for them and can help with performance, right? There's athletes that intentionally want to dehydrate, and they believe that by dehydrating they can lower the body weight, and that this lower body weight means there's less weight to carry, which means it's easier to move, which means you will be faster during the race. So especially like biking or running, um, and this can increase power to weight ratio, and so the goal is to be as light as possible. Does this make sense? So like it kind of makes sense, right? But it's only if you can still maintain or actually increase the power to weight ratio and not have any side effects with the weight loss. But usually what happens is that, up to a certain degree, like weight loss can possibly help an athlete, but excessive amounts or being too much. I mean, each person is different as well. So it's really hard to pinpoint a certain body weight, regardless of sport, that's optimal, right? So too much can cause a problem. So in this study, the influence of hydration status on thermal regulation and cycling, hill climbing, we looked at different athletes that either were dehydrated or maintained their hydration over a long bike ride. And at the end of the long bike ride, they performed timed hill sprint climbs. And what they saw was that performance times were actually significantly faster when the athlete was hydrated and their usual body weight compared to when they were dehydrated and had a lower body weight. And this study is a little bit better than older studies, because older studies they used to dehydrate participants by giving them like diuretics or putting them in a sauna first for a few hours to lose body weight or become dehydrated and then test. So it wasn't really accurate of what happens in the real world, where they're slowly dehydrating as they're exercising. And there's many other studies that continue to add evidence to this, that intentionally dehydrating oneself is not optimal. So, should we lose, gain, or have neutral body weight during exercise then? And if so, then what's the optimal amount? So again, it depends on the athlete, the sport, and environment. In general, and in the textbook and in the 2016 position stand, they're recommending not less than 2% of body weight for a short or moderate duration exercise. So anything that's, under 2 to 3 hours. However, if you look at the real world, what happens in the real world, such as in longer duration events, you're going to see that there's higher amounts of body weight loss. So usually like 3, 4, even up 5 or 6% body weight loss in these kind of events. So some sports, you're not able to consume adequate fluids to maintain your weight or gain weight, or you just can't, right? And the athlete will become dehydrated. And this is like stuff in ultra endurance events or in endurance events in hot and humid weather, like the marathon disables, like what we talked about before in the desert. Um, and do we want to end with no weight loss or possibly weight gain? This A is, might not be feasible, like we said, and it can actually be dangerous and harmful, right? Weight gain, that can cause hyponatremia. Um, you know, at, at worst, it can kill you. You know, um, and at least you have decreased performance and GI issues. So you don't want to gain weight. That's not the goal. So you have to have trial and error, n equals 1. Some athletes may be okay with 2% loss or less, or there could be more, and it's not going to affect their performance. And that's what you really got to focus on is, how's their performance, how is their health, right? So Hal Gebrselassie, he was a really famous marathon runner, and he lost about almost 10% body weight. Now, that's kind of crazy, that's kind of dangerous, but if you see like what's going on, you can see that's not as dangerous. He carb loaded, so he's actually gained a lot of weight compared to his normal body weight, and most of it was carbohydrates and fluids. Um, and it was during the 2009 Dubai Marathon. It's very hot there and humid. But he ran quite fast, right? 2 hours and 5 minutes. How much was he sweating? What do you think would happen if the event lasted longer? So remember, this is only 2 hours and 5 minutes. But what do you think if it happened was like 3 hours or 3.5 hours? I don't think he would have made it. In the Ironman, you're gonna see most athletes that compete in this is gonna have at least 2 to 6% weight loss, and especially so in warm weather conditions. And usually Ironman is in warm weather. Some athletes will have significant decreases in performance with more than 2% water loss. So you have to work with your athlete to see what works best for him or her. Alberto Salazar, he was given his last rites in 1978 Falmouth road race, meaning like they thought he was gonna die because he was like dehydrated. It was like 107 degrees. His body temperature, right? He was a proponent of not really drinking that much fluids, and like he really just no gain, no pain kind of mantra. And then in 1982, he was doing the Boston Marathon duel in the sun. So it was very warm that year. And he famously or infamously didn't take any water during the last 8 miles of the marathon. And again, he wound up in super danger of cardiovascular collapse at the finish. It was kind of like life threatening, but he won. So then people are like, oh, maybe we don't drink water. So remember, N equals 1, and we don't look at just performance. We also want health, right? We don't want that kind of live or die mentality. So strategies to assess hydration status. So how do we assess if you're hydrated or not? So there's different methods. So there's lab methods, laboratory methods, and this could be like isotope dilution. You're measuring plasma solutes. However, we don't really have access to that unless you work for a lab or university, because this costs a lot of money. It's time consuming. You need trained personnel. You can't really do this every day after you do a training run and you want to get it checked out. It's not feasible. So what are some real world methods? So there's some urine testing. So upon waking, you can use specific gravity or osmolality test. So there's some urine testing strips that you urinate on, and then you compare it. There's also more newer items, right? There's a system, it can be a portable system, and you pee on the stick and you put it in the machine. But again, this costs like a couple $1,000s, and you're not gonna carry this machine around. And again, you don't want to pee on yourself. But this is really cool. I think this is a Gatorade sweat patch, and I'll provide a link for that. You guys can check that out, and like you can use your phone and scan it, and it'll tell you the results. It's really cool. I haven't tested it. I think it's just starting to come out, or is coming out shortly. We'll see how popular it is and how accurate it is. Some other methods include urine color. So I think everybody's heard of this or seen this before. So if your urine color looks like really pale lemonade, like really, that's a good sign. But if it looks like apple juice, that's not a good sign. And it's pretty easy to use, really simple, but there's no real scientific evidence for it. And especially if you're peeing into the toilet bowl, into the urinal, there's water in there already. So it kind of like dilutes the color. Um, so it's not that precise. And it can also be affected by certain food substances like what's that, like Mountain Dew, certain B vitamins, beets, right? It can change the color. Like beets can make it like red. B vitamins can make it like neon yellow. Like same thing with Mountain Dew. Weight loss, right? So if you monitor your weight in the morning, that is another indicator to assess hydration status. But of course, there could be some complications using that. So maybe you're weighing yourself at different times, or you didn't use the bathroom, you ate more the night before, you drank a lot before. So there's some pros and cons to that as well. So what they recommend is maybe a combination kind of technique where you look at the urine color plus your body weight plus your thirst. So upon waking, like, are you thirsty? Do you feel dehydrated? Is your mouth like, a little dry? So if you have one condition, it says you may be hypohydrated. Two conditions, you're likely hypohydrated, and you have all three. So if you lost weight, um, you're really thirsty, and your urine is dark, you're very likely to be hypohydrated. So what's the goal for before exercise and hydration? So you want to be hydrated. You want to make sure you avoid any GI upset and consume carbohydrates if needed. Um, so implementation, you want to consume adequate fluids, prior to the event, right? Even not just the day before, but the days before it. And then pre-event, 2 to 4 hours, fluid intake of 5 to 10 milliliters per kilogram. So for a 165-pound male, that's about 65 kilograms. That's about a cup and a half to 3 cups, about 2 to 4 hours prior. And if you're still hypohydrated, meaning if you had the dark urine, you had weight loss, and you have dry mouth, you can add an additional 3 to 5 milliliters per kilogram of fluids 2 hours prior. So that's two to 4 cups. If sodium is needed, so if the athlete is a very heavy salt sweater, the recommendations for sodium is about 460 to 1,150 milligrams per liter. And exact amounts, it's again trial and error. You have to determine on an individual basis, take account of the race conditions, its distance, its intensity, and its temperature. And of course, you do not want to wait until the race day and like, oh, let me try this new method. You want to try it out at least, many weeks prior to see if it's working, if there's any GI issues, and any things you want to, fix. Hydration during exercise or during your event. So the goal is to replace lost body weight to the extent possible without compromising performance. Prevent excessive dehydration, slow dehydration, avoid overconsumption of water or hypotonic fluids, replace sodium if needed, consume carbohydrates if needed, and avoid GI upset. Hydration during the exercise event. So why don't we just drink as much as possible, or at least the same as we lost? Wouldn't that make sense? Um, so it's it may not be possible, right? Like what we said about long duration events or endurance events, it's not really possible. It's really hot, humid, um, and it's not really necessary actually, especially those that are having events that are short duration. It's not hot and it can be very dangerous, like we said. It can cause hyponatremia. So, voluntary dehydration. Athletes may not be able to or want to drink fluids. For example, so those during a 5 kilometer run or doing a marathon, they may not want to slow down or stop for beverages. Team sports, it's not based on their preferences. It's based off of timeouts, substitutions, breaks. Cycling, there's fluids that are handed off, so they have no excessive weight with them. There's certain studies that show that in Puerto Rican soccer players, athletes were allowed to drink as much as they wanted for a week versus mandating fluid intake rates. Um, and what they found out was that when they were, when they were not given a mandate and they could drink as much as they want, they were consuming about 1.1 liters less per day um, compared to when they were given exact recommendations. So it shows that athletes don't really meet their fluid losses, and entering training and competition dehydrated can cause, sports loss of sports performance. Also, about 60% of college athletes in another study show that before practice, their urine specific gravity was indicative of hypohydration. Hydration during exercise or event. So, Another reason is there's a maximum gastric emptying rate. So this is the rate at which food or liquid empties from the stomach to the small intestine. It can only empty so fast, and the body or the stomach cannot match the sweat rate of an athlete. So the max emptying rate for the stomach is about a liter to about a liter and a half per hour, while the max sweat rate is like 2.5 plus liters an hour. And in general, also most people can't really do more than a liter. I've haven't really seen many people that, and there are some, but it's very hard to fit a liter. Just think about it, like that's a liter per hour. It's not 1 liter one time. It's 1 liter per hour, so maybe for 2, 3, 4 hours, that's 4 liters of water. It's very hard. Um, and even then, you don't start at 1 liter. You have to train the gut. You need to start where the athlete is currently at, right? And they're probably drinking a lot less than a liter an hour. And it doesn't mean that's the minimum or that's the maximum amount we start with or end with. Um, you have to work with them. Um, and a lot of athletes, yeah, so it's even less. It's about 16 ounces, 16 to 28 ounces an hour for endurance athletes. And actual race hydration is even less than maximum emptying rate, right? Because you're working a lot harder. Um, as you can see here, steady state exercises levels above 70% VO2 max and high intensity intermittent exercise can both slow down gastric emptying, right? And you're going a little bit harder than 70%. Well, it's close to that. Um, but the body's not gonna really allow you to empty more than a liter. It's just gonna sit. You can drink more, but it's just gonna sit in the stomach and it's just slosh around, and it's just gonna make you feel uncomfortable and cause you to have poor sports performance. So the goal again is to prevent excessive dehydration. So we said 2%. Again, it depends on the person, the race, the conditions, and you also want to prevent excessive sodium loss. And this is during like longer races, right? So there's no specific amount. It has to be individualized, and we're gonna go through sweat rate testing. So it just dependent on sweat rate, sweat composition, duration of exercise, what they're wearing, the environmental conditions, right? This all have an impact on their sweat rate and their sweat um, rehydration needs. For marathoners, the starting point is about 0.4 to 0.8 liters per hour. That's about like a cup and a half to 4 cups an hour. And the lower end is for slow runners. Slower runners, they're not really metabolizing as much as a faster runner, right? While the upper end maybe for faster runners or heavier runners, bigger runners, right? They need more fluids, especially those that are in hot or more humid conditions. If it's much cooler, you may not need as much fluids. So, any real world issues with these recommendations? Why are the recommendations lower than max gastric emptying rate? Hydration during exercise. So, how do we measure sweat rate? So, this is going to be one of your assignments is to measure your sweat rate. We're going to use the Gatorade fluid loss calculator. So I think I'm going to use Gatorade a lot during this lecture. It doesn't mean I'm biased to Gatorade, just that they have some pretty good information, but just know it's from Gatorade. Um, so practical recommendations. Intake depends on sweat rate, acceptable level of dehydration, and GI tolerance. So you need to know the weight before exercise, the weight after exercise, duration of exercise, urine loss, and the amount of food and fluids consumed during exercise. So other recommendations, you want to make sure that the fluid is cold in general because they're better tolerated. Athletes kind of enjoy cooler um, beverages, especially if it's hot outside or warm environment. But however, are there times when warm liquid may be better? Actually, class. So frequent small amounts are generally better tolerated than large bolus amounts, and we talked about that before as well. It also helps stimulate gastric emptying, fluid uptake, and at least every 30 minutes, and it depends on the athlete and the race environment. However, you can do it at, if you're able to do it yourself, you can do it every 10 minutes, 15, 20, whichever your athlete prefers. And you want to update the sweat rate as training progresses. So as you're getting better and you become more acclimated or your gut becomes more gut trained, you can change and get your sweat rate monitored throughout. All right, see what's working and what's not working. So what about sodium recommendations? So those that are heavy sweaters, um, they need more than about 1.2 liters of fluids per hour. So that's about 2.5 pounds per hour. So a heavy salt sweater, first, how do you know you're a heavy salt sweater, right? You can get tested, or you can use subjective tests, such as one, after you exercise, is there a lot of white chalky um, marks on your skin or on your clothes or your outfit? So like this guy's cap has a lot of salt stains, right? If you see that, that could mean you're a heavy salt sweater. Does your eyes sting when you're sweating and it hits your eyes? Does it burn? Do you have a high craving for salty foods during or after exercise? Cramping, So if you have these markers, it can increase your risk or probability that you are a heavy salt sweater. Also, if your sport is 2 hours or longer, you can be, recommendation is having some sodium in your during your race or event, and it's up to about a gram of sodium per hour. However, it's up and down dependent on the person. Sodium recommendations. So endurance athletes that are not a heavy sweater or heavy salt sweater and it's less than 2 hours, the recommendation is about 460 to 690 milligrams per liter, and that's the amount found in your regular Gatorade and in most sports drinks. Again, sodium promotes body water retention, so there's less urine created. Sodium stimulates thirst, tastes better, so increases voluntary consumption. Um, and it also increases the need during heat. So when it's hot, you do need a little bit more sodium. So which do you recommend for someone? The regular Gatorade or again Gatorade endurance formula? So remember, there's 456 milligrams in the regular Gatorade and it's about 873 milligrams in 12 ounces in the endurance one. So again, it depends, right? If it's longer duration and if your athlete's a heavy salt sweater, then you would pick the endurance one. So other tips, stay cool, right? So athletes exercising, especially important for those that exercise in the heat. Wear outfits that can help with evaporation, lighter colors versus darker colors. Um, so like Nike has dry fit, or it has those different kind of materials that help with that evaporation. You can also cool the skin with sponge or towel dunked in ice water. And you don't want to be too cold because you don't want to constrict the blood vessels. That can worsen your performance. Drink cool or cold solutions like a slushy, hand cooling, head cooling. So putting your hands like something cold, like ice or something, um, or cooling fans. Hydration after exercise. You want to restore lost body weight, replace the sodium and other electrolytes, consume carbohydrates, protein, avoid GI upset. Um, so if there's time, right, if there's no more workouts for the rest of the day until like 24 hours or so, or the next day is just gonna be really easy workout, then you don't really need to focus on, an exact amount right away. You can, in general, just drink by thirst. However, if there is another workout, let's say in a few hours, or you're having 2 days, or there's consecutive like hard workouts or there's a competition where you're working, where you have to compete day in and day out, you may want to hydrate faster, and replace a little bit higher. So this is the place where you kind of go a little bit over. So for every pound loss, you drink about 2.5 to 3 cups. So, and that's also to account for urination loss, and that's why they're giving a little more. And they also recommend to have sodium and electrolyte in the food or beverage, because that will help increase retention and help you drink more, because that's going to be a lot of fluids you're drinking, right? So, let's say you lost 3 pounds, that's like 9 cups. That's very hard to drink if it's just plain water. Overhydration, however, you want to make sure you don't overhydrate, because again, this can lead to hyponatremia. And this is when athletes can, drink more than their sweat losses. They end up gaining weight. And the primary cause is when fluid intake is greater than sweat and urinary losses, exacerbated with excessive loss of sodium in sweat, with the inadequate sodium intake and excessive fluid intake in the hours or days leading to the event. It's typically seen in recreational athletes, those with sweat rates lower than competitive athletes. They drink too much when they're given the opportunity to drink water, and this is usually due to belief that greater need to drink, and females are at higher risk due to their smaller body size and lower sweat rates. So symptoms of hyponatremia, or diagnosis, you have plasma sodium of less than 130 millimoles per liter. You will be exhibiting some bloating, puffiness, weight gain, and that's a big indicator. So if there's weight gain, that's a big sign. Nausea, vomiting, headache, confusion, delirium, seizure, respiratory distress, loss of consciousness, and possibly death if untreated. So the treatment is usually hypertonic IV. So before, they always just put everybody in the same boat and says, oh, they're dehydrated, and we'll just give water or fluids. So if you gave somebody with hyponatremia more fluids, what would happen? These are some recommendations by the position stand. Some more tips from the Sports Nutrition Handbook. Usually I don't really recommend like you have to do this or you can't do that, but in general these recommendations are pretty on point. And you can read it and just tell me what you guys think. If you agree, disagree. So fluid concerns, there's many different roads, and this is not just fluids, but it can be nutrition. There's many different roads to the same destination. Some are just more optimal. Guidelines again are just that, guidelines. So the 2016 position stand or any guideline that you receive is only up to date to that time frame, and also they're not exact, right? They're like, you have to, that's the art, remember, you have to adjust it to your athlete. Your answer may be right or not as wrong, but just be able to justify and have some strong reasoning to back your answer up. Know why you chose this tool instead of that tool, or why did I recommend this and not that, right? And again, the goal is not just high performance, but also safety and health. You want to work with the client to support his or her training needs. In summary, fluid electrolyte needs must be personalized, must be individualized. There's no cookie cutter approach. There's no one size fits all. So everybody has to drink 1 cup of water before, and you can't do that. And you should have a fluid and electrolyte plan. So again, I say should, not have to, because some sports you don't have to, right? Some athletes you don't have to. And it must be practiced and adjusted and tested to fit your specific client. Again, consider the athlete, the event, and the environmental conditions, right? Temperature, humidity, altitude. Is it sunny? Is it windy? They all make a difference. If you're in Kona versus Antarctica versus the deserts of Morocco, or the upcoming Summer Olympics of Tokyo, right? We have to know the environment you can be, the athlete will be performing at. So for the Summer Olympics, does anybody know what the temperature is in Tokyo is?